If everything we've been taught about human history is standing on sand, then Göbekli Tepe is the wave that wipes it clean. We're told a simple story. Agriculture births villages. Villages create specialization, and specialization finally builds temples. But what about a 12,000-year-old temple on a windswept hill in southeastern Turkey? Who carved T-shaped monoliths taller than a person, weighing tens of tons, with incisions so precise they feel governed by an invisible aesthetic code? And if the builders were merely hunter-gatherers, why did they behave like architects with a curriculum? Ask yourself this: what if we've inverted the logic of civilization? What if religion, ritual, and the urge to connect with something larger were the prime engines, pulling people together, dividing labor, drafting blueprints in collective memory, then dragging stone across seasons of dust and wind? What if, before the plow and the seed, there were keepers of knowledge, hidden builders, who turned a hilltop into a ritual hub, a memory vault, perhaps even a library written in stone? Can you hear the language of rock? Foxes, snakes, wild boar, hyenas, vultures, creatures raised from the Paleolithic fog, arranged into a symbolic code we still can't read. Arms folded along the shafts, belts cinched with careful straps, details that suggest these T-pillars aren't merely stone, they're personae, sentinels, witnesses. Who taught these hands to turn stone into character? Who set the standards so that circle after circle speaks in the same tongue? Can you hear the language of rock? Foxes, snakes, wild boar, hyenas, vultures, creatures raised from the Paleolithic fog, arranged into a symbolic code we still can't read. Arms folded along the shafts, belts cinched with careful straps, details that suggest these T-pillars aren't merely stone, they're personae, sentinels, witnesses. Who taught these hands to turn stone into character? Who set the standards so that circle after circle speaks in the same tongue? If any of this makes you a little uneasy, good. Göbekli Tepe challenges everything we thought we knew. It forces us to ask, could it be that we've missed an entire chapter of our own story? Tighten your seatbelt. In this investigation, we'll confront the official narrative, probe its gaps, and, just maybe, glimpse the silhouettes of hidden builders standing behind the curtain of dust and time. Let's start with the version you'll read in textbooks and museum placards, the story that most archaeologists would sign their name to. Göbekli Tepe sits on a low limestone ridge in southeastern Turkey, overlooking the Harran Plain. When you stand there, wind pushing against your jacket and fields stretching to the horizon, it doesn't look like the cradle of a paradox. It looks ordinary. And that's part of the shock. Under this modest hill, layers of enclosures were built and rebuilt over centuries during the pre-pottery Neolithic, roughly between 9,600 and 8,200 BCE, well before metal, wheels, pottery, or cities, and right at the dawn of agriculture's first experiments in the Fertile Crescent. The site came into focus for modern science in the late 20th century, after scattered mentions and surveys were followed by systematic excavation. What emerged was unlike anything else from that time frame. Circular and oval enclosures, each defined by a ring of T-shaped limestone pillars, with two larger T-pillars standing like guardians in the center. Some pillars reach more than 5 meters in height and weigh many tons. On their broad faces, relief carvings of animals: foxes, snakes, boar, aurochs, vultures, scorpions, and abstract signs, executed with a confidence that feels anything but tentative. The official narrative takes these facts and builds a careful, sober explanation. First point: the builders were hunter-gatherers, or at most, very early experimenters in plant management. There's no domestic architecture, no clusters of houses at a scale you'd expect for a settled town, no streets, no hearths lined up like a neighborhood, no trash mounds of daily life. What you do find are tools of chipped stone, the lithic repertoire of people who hunted, butchered, scraped hides, and shaped rock with the patient percussion of flint on flint. No pottery, no metal, and crucially, a surprising scarcity of evidence for large-scale permanent habitation right at the hill. Second point, the site functioned as a ritual or ceremonial center. Think of it as a sanctuary to which groups converged, not a city where they stayed. The layout strengthens that reading. Enclosures have a standard grammar, a ring of pillars, benches, or low walls connecting them, and in the middle, two towering T-pillars facing each other, as if locked in a silent dialogue. The pillars themselves sometimes wear belts, loincloths, or folded arms, which many scholars read as stylized human forms, anthropomorphic beings supporting the sky or presiding over whatever happened inside these stone circles. The animals may be symbolic, totems of clans, signs of mythic stories, warnings, protectors, or markers of seasonal cycles. We don't know the script, but we can see the syntax, repetition, convention, and intent. Third point, organization without states. According to the official story, you don't need kings, bureaucrats, or walled cities to build big things. You need motivation, cooperation, and time. Picture scattered bands and tribes moving with the seasons who share stories, alliances, and obligations. At certain moments of the year, perhaps tied to migrations of animals or the stars, these groups gather. They feast, they exchange, they arrange marriages, they renew ties. And when the call goes out, they work. For weeks or months at a time, they cut blocks from nearby quarries, lever them onto sleds, haul them up prepared ramps, and raise them into sockets cut into bedrock floors. Then the artists step in, men and women who have learned by practice and repetition, chiseling animals that mattered to the people who stood in that circle. Fourth point, feasting as fuel. The official narrative often invokes big, organized feasts to explain the labor force. Heaps of animal bones, especially gazelle and wild game, suggest mass consumption events. Food is the original social contract. Come to the hill, share in the kill, drink, dance, renew the myths, then lend your back and your skill to raising the pillars that honor the powers you believe in. If you want a modern mental model, imagine a festival that also builds a cathedral, piece by piece, year after year. Fifth point, the enclosures were deliberately backfilled. And here's a key element that sounds strange but has a ritual logic. After a period of use, an enclosure is retired. People bring in rubble, broken stone, fragments of older art, animal bones, debris, and pack the space tightly, sealing it. Then nearby or above, a new enclosure is built with updated designs. It's like a liturgy of renewal. Each circle has a life, and when its time ends, it is honored by burial, not abandonment. In this view, backfilling isn't hiding, it's completion. It's closing the book with a careful bookmark so the next chapter knows exactly where to begin. Sixth point, the regional picture matters. Göbekli Tepe is part of a broader constellation of early ritual architecture in the Upper Mesopotamian and Anatolian world. Similar T-pillars and carved traditions appear at other sites, suggesting a cultural horizon rather than a solitary miracle. If you map it out, you see communities experimenting with structures that blend art, myth, and congregation long before the so-called urban revolution. The implication is that complexity started not only in granaries and workshops, but also in sanctuaries. Seventh point, ritual first, agriculture second, or at least in parallel. This is the heart of the official reinterpretation. For a long time, scholars assumed a ladder. First, domestication, then surplus, then stratification, then monumental architecture. Göbekli Tepe invites a different picture. Ritual can precede or stimulate domestication. Gathering at a sacred hill creates demand for food, for predictability, for social glue. And that demand encourages people to plant, tend, and store. In other words, religion and shared symbolic life may have been the engine that pulled agriculture behind it, not a luxury purchased with surplus. This is not a conspiracy against the old model. It's a refinement. It doesn't deny that farming changes everything. It simply says human meaning-making came to the party early, maybe first. 8th point, skill without writing. The pillars show a standardization that implies training and memory, but the official narrative doesn't require a lost written language. Oral cultures can be astonishingly precise. Techniques can be transmitted by apprenticeship, stories, songs, gestures, and demonstration. The manual lives in people, not on clay tablets. When you repeat a design across generations, you don't need a blueprint etched on bark. You need masters and novices working side by side, season after season. 9th point, engineering with simple means. To raise massive stones, you don't need cranes of bronze. You need physics, patience, and planning. Levers, ropes, sleds, and earthen ramps can accomplish a great deal if you coordinate enough hands and align them with a calendar of good weather and available food. The bedrock floors are carved with sockets that secure the pillars. The caps and crossbars distribute weight. The circular plan braces itself. Nothing requires alien alloys or secret machines, only knowledge born from trial, error, and a culture that honors the outcome enough to keep trying. And finally, the cautious conclusion that holds it all together. Göbekli Tepe is a ceremonial center built by hunter-gatherers at the dawn of the Holocene, a place where people gathered to conduct rituals, tell stories in stone, and reinvent their social world. Its deliberate backfilling marks cycles of closure and renewal. Its art encodes shared symbols we no longer fully grasp. Its scale demonstrates that human cooperation and imagination were powerful long before formal states and cities. The site doesn't overthrow archaeology. It challenges it to widen the lens and to accept that complexity isn't the exclusive child of farms and palaces. Complexity can also be the child of belief. That is the official narrative in its strongest, most thoughtful form. No hidden super-civilization required, no forgotten empires, no anachronistic technologies. Just early people doing something difficult because it mattered to them, because it bound them together, because it made their world make sense. And yet, as you let that account settle, questions bob back to the surface. How do small, mobile groups sustain multi-decade building programs without leaving more obvious living footprints right at the hill? Why the insistence on such consistent iconography across different enclosures? Why bury enclosures so carefully instead of letting time erase them naturally? Could ritual alone coordinate logistics on this scale, or are we missing pieces of the social puzzle? Specialists, hierarchies, institutions that simply don't fossilize easily? Hold those questions. We'll need them. Because to investigate the hidden builders, we must first give the official story its full weight, and then test its beams to see where the light shines through. Let's test the beams of the official story and see where the light leaks in. Start with the stones themselves. A T-pillar 5 meters tall and weighing many tons doesn't just happen because a few bands felt festive. It demands a choreography, identifying the right limestone beds, cutting the outline, freeing the mass with repeated blows, shaping the crossbar so it won't shear when raised, preparing a bedrock socket with precise tolerances, aligning the pillar, coordinating ropes, sledges, levers, ramps, and most importantly, people. Not once, not twice, but again and again across multiple enclosures. Ask yourself, can a network of small mobile groups, converging sporadically, maintain that level of repeatable precision over decades without something that looks suspiciously like organization? Who kept the calendar? Who ensured the quarry team's cuts matched the socket team's measurements? Who remembered the tricks learned from the last failed lift so the next one didn't end with a shattered monolith and broken feet? Then there's the grammar of the art. Across different circles and phases, the motifs aren't random. Foxes sprint in low relief as if mid-hunt. Serpents coil and slither with a consistency of profile and scale. Belts, loincloths, and folded arms appear with such confidence that the pillars read as stylized human bodies, torsos with shoulders, notches where hands meet, fingers curling like rules remembered rather than guessed. Standardization is a teacher's fingerprint. If the builders were ad hoc teams, why does the iconography feel like a school? Where are the awkward pillars, the student work, the experiments that miss the mark? Why do different enclosures, separated in time, still speak the same visual language as though a canon existed and apprentices learned to obey it? Consider the problem of time itself. Hunter-gatherer mobility isn't chaos, it's a discipline tuned to seasons, migrations, fruiting cycles, and water. But building on this scale is also a seasonal discipline. Quarry when the ground is dry, haul before the worst winds, carve when the stone is most workable. Now put those two metronomes together. How often do they sync? Enough to carve, haul, raise, and finish multiple pillars per enclosure, then repeat for the next. If the window closes early one year, drought, poor hunts, conflict, who protects the half-finished circle from erosion and theft until the teams return? The official narrative says ritual is the glue. Fair enough. But glue not only binds, it schedules. Who sets the date? Who enforces the rendezvous? And here's where it gets strange. The backfilling. Ritual retirement makes emotional sense, but the practice looks like sealing, dense, deliberate, and thorough. The fill includes stone chips, broken sculpture, animal bones, detritus from life and craft. It's not a casual, wind-blown blanket. It's a packed archive that smothers the interior, sometimes preserving the pillars in a kind of engineered tomb. If the goal is renewal, why not leave the circle to weather down with dignity and raise the next one beside it? Why spend precious labor to erase what you just honored? Is it respect or restriction? Is someone trying to keep prying eyes out, or to protect lore so potent it must be hidden, layered, and locked? Add the silence of the neighborhood. Where are the big kitchens, the refuse mounds, the hearth clusters that scream settlement? The official answer: this is a sanctuary, not a town. People came, feasted, worked, and left. But feasting at the scale required to fuel quarry teams leaves stubborn fingerprints, ash, middens, pits, scatters of broken tools, trivial debris from dozens of tasks we barely think about. Weaving, hafting, mending, sharpening. We find some evidence, yes, but not a footprint commensurate with century-long cycles of major works. Could the living quarters be elsewhere, down the slopes, now eroded, or in satellite camps? Possibly. Yet the gap invites a harder question. If the visible footprint of daily life is light, perhaps the social apparatus was lean by design. Specialists traveling light, knowledge concentrated in few hands, then dispersing like sparks after the rite. Let's talk memory, how the site remembers itself. The two central pillars in many enclosures face one another like protagonists. Their shoulders carry belts, their hands rest low, their presence feels intentional, even liturgical. Between enclosures, you sense a lineage, as if each circle speaks to the previous and prefigures the next. That's not improvisation, that's tradition. Tradition requires custodians, people who say, "No, the belt sits here, the arms fold like this, the fox runs at this angle." In an oral world, tradition is enforced by persona and performance, masters correcting novices, chants recounting measures, stories embedding rules. Where then are the masters in our models? We talk about communities and ritual, but shy away from naming an institution, a brotherhood, a guild, an order, whatever you prefer, that carries style and standard through time. Now tilt your head toward the sky. I won't claim star maps or rigid alignments we can't defend, but imagine a community that marks seasons by the behavior of animals, the arc of the sun, the return of specific winds. If the circle's openings, placements, or pillar pairs resonate with those cycles, even loosely, that implies longitudinal observation. Longitudinal observation implies continuity, the same people, or at least the same office, noting, remembering, comparing this year's dawn to last year's. Can a purely ad hoc festival cadence maintain that continuity for centuries without some ledger of the mind, some role tasked with keeping cosmic time? And if someone keeps cosmic time, they carry social weight. We often call that weight priesthood, shamanic authority, or in secular terms, elite. Then the paradox of tools, exquisite art without metal. Yes, stone on stone can produce wonders, but the sheer volume of skilled relief carving suggests practice, lots of it. Practice implies training spaces, waste pieces, incremental attempts before tackling a central monolith. Where are the practice yards, crowded with rejects, half-carved beasts, snapped pillars, where novices learned not to blow the edge or misjudge the depth? If those yards existed and have been missed, that's a field problem we may solve. If they didn't, perhaps because training happened elsewhere, then Göbekli Tepe is the showroom, not the workshop, the place where perfected methods arrive. Who runs a showroom? Artisans who travel, or a center that exports style to satellites? In either case, we're staring at networks, not one-off picnics. Logistics whisper another riddle. Food moves like stone moves. To hold a labor pool on the hill for weeks takes planning. Drying meat, storing grains or nuts, scheduling hunts to coincide with gatherings, perhaps even experimenting with wild stands of cereal near water. Proto-cultivation. The official narrative concedes that ritual can pull agriculture behind it. But if ritual is the locomotive, who is the engineer? Someone has to predict needs, tally mouths, and prevent feast from turning into famine. We resist words like manager, overseer, administrator in Paleolithic contexts because they sound anachronistic. Yet, a rose by any other name still counts rations. And the most human question, motive. Why bury a circle you poured heart and back into? If retirement is renewal, where is the pageantry in the dirt? Stations of farewell carved into the fill, formalized layers, tokens that scream ceremony. We do see curated fill, a mix of meaningful fragments and mundane rubble, which hints at intention. But intention toward what? Closure, concealment, consecration, conservation. If concealment matters, someone feared misuse. Knowledge replicated by the wrong hands, rites performed by the uninitiated, symbols misread. That smells like hierarchy of access, levels of initiation. If conservation matters, someone knew these pillars were fragile against time and weather, and chose burial as preservation, like seeds saved for a harsher spring. Both readings require a future-oriented mind, builders who thought not only in seasons, but in centuries. Let's push on a quiet assumption that groups came together because the rite demanded bodies. What if the causality sometimes ran the other way? Rites engineered to gather bodies because architects needed labor. A calendar of myths doubles as a project plan. A story that says, "The fox must run before the serpent sleeps" is a poetic way to say quarry before the east winds turn. If that sounds cynical, remember, meaning and management aren't enemies. The best organizers hide schedules in songs. Notice how every path we walk circles the same invisible sculpture: structure, social, temporal, pedagogical. The official narrative grants motivation and cooperation, but often stops shy of naming the durable containers that hold them. Yet the site behaves as if containers existed: canons, roles, rules, prohibitions, privileges. Without those, you can still make art. With those, you can make art that repeats its excellence over centuries. So who were the hidden builders in this light that leaks through the beams? Not faceless people, people arranged, people remembering, people who had officers of memory and masters of craft, people who measured without numbers and wrote without letters. People who buried their work not because they were done with it, but because sealing was part of the work. This is not a plea for aliens or an empire in disguise. It is a call to admit the obvious when staring at those pillars. Simplicity does not explain repetition at scale. Spontaneity does not explain canon. If you can't see the institution, perhaps it is because its bones were flesh, songs, oaths, stories, reputations, things that fossilize poorly but bind better than mortar. Hold that in your mind as we consider what could fill the gaps. Maybe the answer is as earthly as a traveling guild of ritual artisans, specialists who move, teach, and enforce style. Maybe it is a lineage of knowledge keepers, an order with initiation grades, passwords of myth, and responsibilities inherited like sacred tools. Maybe it is a community of catastrophe survivors, nursing a memory of how we built before and reducing it to essentials they could carry through lean centuries. Or, if you prefer your edges sharp, maybe an external catalyst contacted them. A neighboring culture with a jump in technique, a spark that lit the dry grass of local genius. But before we choose, we must admit the doubt is earned. The pillars taught by repetition, the fill laid with intent, the hill governed by calendars we no longer keep, the silence where a city should be and the voice where none should exist, the grammar of stone, consistent, insistent, as if recited. That is the doubt. It doesn't overthrow the official story. It compels it to grow muscles, to account for teachers without tablets, managers without ledgers, priests without temples to live in, and blueprints that breathe in human memory. It says, show me the people behind the phrase, the community. Not to invent kings, but to honor the builder's sophistication with models worthy of their work. Because if we can't name the structures, we'll keep calling miracles what were, in fact, institutions, fragile, human, and ingenious. Let's set the official story on the table beside our doubts and walk through 4 competing scenarios, each earthly, each testable in spirit, if not yet in every detail. None requires lost empires or miracles. All require us to imagine social structures that leave light fingerprints. First, the itinerant elites and traveling artisans model. Picture a ritual economy that beats like a drum across a wide landscape. Multiple forager bands share myths, marriages, and obligations, and once or twice a year the drum calls them to the hill. But the call isn't just a party summons. It's a work order, set to music. At the center of that network is a small cadre, ritual leaders with authority over time and artisans with authority over form. They move between groups, carrying style and rules. How to lay a socket, how to bevel an edge, how a belt rides the waist of a pillar, and which animals belong where. Their prestige is portable. They're paid in feasts, hides, obsidian, favors, alliances. Because they do not farm, they also do not tie themselves to one place. Mobility is their strength. They can scout quarries, standardize measures, correct mistakes, and preserve the canon by sheer presence and reputation. This model answers several riddles at once. It explains the standardized iconography. Masters teach apprentices at multiple nodes, then converge to execute major pieces. It explains logistics. Regional networks pool labor during brief windows, guided by a calendar that leaders keep in mind and in story. It explains the light residential footprint. The knowledge lives in people, not buildings. The workshops are wherever the masters are, and the hill is for culmination, not daily grind. And it gives reason to backfill. Retirement is a right the elites oversee to close one chapter and legitimize the next. What it asks from us is humility about complexity. You don't need palaces to make policy if the policy is sung, sworn, and remembered. Second, the Orders of Knowledge Keepers model. Think guild, brotherhood, college, call it what you like. Here the emphasis is less on mobility and more on institutional roles. Within a web of allied bands, certain lineages or initiated circles guard the how: quarry selection, lifting techniques, icon grammar, cosmological stories that define the order of a circle. Admission requires trial and oaths. Higher grades unlock deeper lore. The order curates a living canon. Two central pillars like officiants, animals arranged by rule, belts and hands placed with symbolic consistency. Apprentices learn on smaller stones and peripheral tasks. Masters handle central pillars and critical lifts. This model foregrounds tradition and continuity. It fits the feeling that enclosures are not improvisations, but chapters in a long text. It can also absorb loose celestial rhythms. Orders keep calendars, not as rigid observatories, but as guardians of recurring rites. It makes sense of careful backfilling as a sacralized procedure. A retiring enclosure is closed by liturgy, its inner space sealed from profane use. It clarifies how expertise persists without writing. The order is the book, and initiation is the index. What it demands from us is a willingness to see hierarchy without crowns, layered access, yet no single king, obligations, yet no bureaucratic clay tablets. Third, the catastrophe survivors and cultural memory model. In this scenario, sometime before the site's flourishing, a community, or communities, survives traumatic upheaval. Climate swings at the end of the last ice age, regional shocks, sudden displacement. From that crucible, a memory of building survives, fragmentary, simplified, carried in myths that say, we lift stones to speak to powers, we arrange beings in circles, we bury to protect. Call it a technological liturgy, reduced to essentials. When conditions stabilize enough, people enact those memories with the tools at hand. They do not resurrect an old empire. They translate a lost repertoire into a new medium, stone instead of brick, leverage instead of cranes, oral canon instead of carved scripts. This model illuminates the sudden confidence in art and plan. It's not a bolt from the blue. It's a restart from an older template filtered through necessity. It can make sense of backfilling as conservation born from trauma. You bury what you fear to lose. It also tolerates the absence of local precursors that look like proto-Göbekli. The precursor may be geographic or cultural elsewhere, its traces erased or unrecognized. The price of this model is that it leans on inference. You must be comfortable with memory as technology, a fragile thing that leaves fewer artifacts than pots. Fourth, the external catalyst and cultural spark model, the conservative edge case. Not alien, neighboring. A contact horizon brings a packet of techniques and motifs from another region or cultural cluster. Ways of lifting, composing reliefs, or organizing rites. The packet lands in a receptive environment where ritual already binds people, and the mix supercharges what was possible locally. The result looks like a leap, but it's a fusion. Style spreads quickly because it rides on social prestige. Techniques spread because they solve problems elegantly. If the original source fizzles, migrates, or hides in plain sight, we're left staring at the glow and guessing the spark. This model is humble. It doesn't demand ghosts or global sagas, just human networks that extend beyond our excavations. It can explain standardization without positing a single central school. Standards ride with itinerant carriers. It also shrugs at scarce practice yards. Training might occur where the catalyst culture resides or in transitory camps. Its weakness is obvious. The source remains blurry until we find stronger links, and inference without anchors makes scholars rightly cautious. Now, weigh them. The traveling artisans and knowledge orders models are cousins. They share a backbone of role-based structure. The first is kinetic. Authority moves and convenes. The second is layered. Authority abides and initiates. The catastrophe memory model explains the why, the emotional urgency, the preservation instincts that bury and seal. The external catalyst model explains the how, a sudden alignment of means and motifs. You can combine them. A memory-bearing order recruits traveling specialists when the calendar opens. A neighboring style drops in and is standardized by a guild. A traumatic past compels sealing ceremonies overseen by elites who plan the next circle before the last is fully entombed. Let's weigh our models against the toughest friction points in one sweep. When it comes to repeatable precision across decades, traveling artisans achieve it through masters who return seasonally to enforce method. Knowledge orders achieve it through a fixed canon and ranked initiation. Catastrophe memory achieves it by replaying a story template older than the hill itself. And an external catalyst achieves it by importing a ready-made standard that locals adopt. The standardized iconography tells a similar tale. Roving experts impose a school style in the traveling model, initiation guards icon law in the order model. Sacred repertoire is preserved as mythic scenes in the memory model, and a shared visual grammar moves along exchange networks in the catalyst model. Backfilling with intent points in different directions too. Artisans close a chapter ritually to legitimize the next commission. Orders seal sancta to protect purity and lore. Survivors bury to conserve what time might steal. While the catalyst model struggles here unless the sealing itself encodes received doctrine. The light living footprint set against a heavy project is explained by dispersed production with the hill as stage for artisans, by off-site or episodic residence and training for orders, by communities wary of building dense settlements and preferring periodic convergence in the memory frame, and by techniques arriving without urban baggage, so lifeways stay mobile in the catalyst case. Finally, calendars and continuity demand authority. In the traveling model, leaders hold the calendar as social capital. In the order model, offices keep ritual time as a duty. In the memory model, cycles are vows to ancestors and survival. And in the catalyst model, contact episodes set rhythms that locals codify. If you press me to choose the leanest explanation that honors the evidence while resisting fantasy, I'd say the backbone is an order of knowledge animated by traveling specialists. Add a seasoning of cultural memory to account for depth and urgency, and keep external catalyst on the table as a minority report, useful when we eventually map more sites and see lines we can't yet draw. In that blended picture, the hidden builders are not faceless crowds. They are roles, masters of lift and line, keepers of myth and season, initiates who decide when a pillar is human enough to stand in the center and when an enclosure has earned its burial. They manage without ledgers, govern without walls, and write in stone so that their canon can survive the faltering of flesh. And that brings us to a deeper recognition. Each model assumes something radical and simple. That belief is infrastructure. We often treat myth as decoration on the hard machinery of life. Here, myth is the machinery. It marshals bodies, sequences tasks, preserves rules, selects masters, and decides when to seal a work like a seed pod. Once you see belief doing that level of heavy lifting, the pillars stop looking miraculous and start looking managerial. Sacred project plans disguised as animals, belts, and hands. What, then, remains unsolved? Three things: provenance, pedagogy, and purpose of burial. Where exactly did the canon come from? How, step by step, did novices become masters without leaving obvious practice debris? And, most provocatively, what combination of reverence, fear, and foresight demanded that beauty be hidden to complete its meaning? Each model points toward answers, but none closes the case. That's not a flaw, it's an invitation. So when you whisper hidden builders, imagine neither aliens nor kings. Imagine human institutions that fossilize poorly, oaths, songs, reputations, taboos, doing what institutions do best, coordinating strangers into a single hand. Imagine a guild without guild halls, a college without parchment, a calendar kept in the eyes of those who watch the wind. Imagine artisans who know that the final act of creation is burial, because the work's power lies not only in being seen, but in being saved. From here, we turn the corner. If these alternatives sketch plausible identities, which one best matches the signature Göbekli Tepe leaves in stone and soil? And which questions should we ask next to force the models to compete, so that the one that remains is not only compelling, but courageous enough to be wrong where the truth demands it? What if we've been reading the site backward? We keep asking, what did they believe that made them build? But turn the lens. What did they build that made them believe? If architecture can manufacture meaning, if stone can train memory, then Göbekli Tepe isn't just a shrine to a story. It's a machine that writes the story into people. And if that's true, who were the operators, the hidden builders in flesh and breath? Who decided when to start the machine, when to stop it, and when to bury its gears? Ask yourself, if ritual can precede farming, what else have we assumed must come later that might, in fact, come first? Bureaucracy without buildings, schools without writing, calendars without numbers? Imagine a world where appointment and authority live in voices, not in offices, where a belt carved on stone is as binding as a seal pressed in clay. If we accept that possibility, how many missing pieces are only missing because they were never made of things that fossilize? Then the burial. Was it farewell or firewall? If a circle is a text, does backfilling close the book or encrypt it? Perhaps the debt a community owes. The sacred is paid only when the sacred is protected from misuse, sealed so that the right remains whole even after the people who knew it are gone. Or perhaps the burial is an audition for us, a test to see whether a future species will care enough to excavate carefully, to argue respectfully, to reconstruct a grammar of stone without inventing a fairy tale of kings. What if the final act of every enclosure is a question addressed to us? Will you reduce what you don't understand to magic, or will you widen your model of the human? Because the more we widen it, the more ordinary the miracle becomes. A guild with no guild hall, a college with no parchment, a calendar kept by those who watch the wind and remember the measure of hands upon a pillar. And yet, even in the widened frame, we are still missing names. We can sketch roles, lift captains, image masters, calendar keepers, but we cannot pronounce the syllables they answered to or the jokes they told while the stone hung in the sling. We can infer the weight of their choices, but not the weight of their days. That ignorance is humbling. It is also an invitation. So here is the grand open question I can't close. Who were the hidden builders to you? Were they traveling masters carrying a sung constitution from valley to valley? Were they initiates of an order that treated stone as scripture and burial as binding? Were they survivors compressing a lost repertoire into a portable rite? Or were they neighbors bearing a spark that lit dry grass into canon? Tell me which model you lean toward, and why. Tell me what evidence would make you switch sides. If you stood on that hill with dust in your teeth and a rope in your hands, what role would you claim, and what rule would you refuse to break? Because the mystery doesn't end at the trench's edge. It ends when we stop asking better questions. Stay curious. Stay questioning. And if belief is infrastructure, then let's build a better bridge between their world and ours. One argument, one doubt, one careful inference at a time.